How you doing? We're here to talk about tailings today. Such a
Yeah,
lovely topic. It's so exciting.
yeah. So welcome again. You're back. We're impressed. That's a special degree of masochism to the B Squared Natural Capital Conversations podcast. And as Benjamin already alluded to, we're going to talk about tailings today. Now, tailings, they're not natural, Benjamin. Can you
Nope.
explain to me how they're natural capital?
So they're natural capital because they fundamentally deplete local natural resources. They deplete
Okay.
local land, they deplete local water, and they fundamentally create a local footprint that has to be managed in perpetuity by local owners. So by definition, they deplete natural capital. They do not start as natural capital. And that is where tailings are in the world. It's important to keep that in mind. So
Okay. Well, that's
mining companies leave a long-term massive liability behind when they close the mine, and that is the tailings dam or the TSF. We'll be civil with our because
you.
not everything's a dam anymore.
You're very jargonistic. The tailings storage facility, for anyone who's listening who's not up on the acronyms we use. Um, the other good point around tailings, as you said, they take up a lot of natural capital, and a mine needs them. I like the analogy of constipation. You eat food, you've got to go somewhere. If you're constipated, your system doesn't work, it eventually shuts down and you die. So, as we get ore from the mine, we process it, remove what we're after. We've got to store the waste somewhere. We can't just put it back neatly in the mine. So, really, without tailings, we don't have a mine. So, it is kind of important to our operations.
Yeah, and without tailings, more importantly, before we don't have a mine, we don't have a license to operate. Our single biggest liability that we leave behind is the tailings dam because the tailings dam combines together the water liability because long-term tailings impact water tables. And they also consume a huge amount of water as they're being constructed because they're constructed of only two basic things, waste and water. Those are the two things
Yep.
that are behind the dam. And they're also fundamentally leave behind a massive geotechnical liability. So we've got lots of history. We've got lots of things we can talk about. But the first thing we have to do is we have to give empathy. We have to start with empathy because this is a very hot topic conversation. And the thing that we are lacking, I think, the most in all of this is the human capital empathy.
Okay. Please elaborate.
So tailings have been managed for thousands of years. I'd argue there's examples of tailings dams going back to King Solomon's mine in Israel. You fundamentally, we use tailings to look at early waste, stampings, leftovers, all sorts of things from processing. Some of the earliest tailings I've seen have been from the original Rio Tinto mine in Spain, which was mined back in Roman times. You could see the little tiny holes where people climbed into the ore body to get at the silver on the edges of the pit. So this is an old problem. This is not a new problem. And the problem with old problems is there's a massive amount of shame and guilt and history and anger and frustration built up over hundreds, if not thousands of years. And what we're dealing with is we're dealing with two basic problems. We're dealing with the shame and guilt of the past versus what we have to do to change the future. And this is where natural capital optimization becomes very key because you have to separate those two problems into two very different boxes. You cannot sit there and hold, and I hate to use the word dialectic, but a dialectic is the concept of holding two ideas at the same time. You can't hold the problems surrounding the past, where 99% of the tailings world is focused, versus the much larger problem of what we're going to do going in the future. Because mining is about to do a logarithmic, a 10x scale jump in scale of the average mine in the world to get what we need for the energy transition and for the transition from a carbon based economy to a non carbon based economy.
So, what you're saying there, head grades are going down. So, there's more waste and less metal in the ore we're mining, and demand is going up. So, it's a double whammy. And the one thing that is going to grow out of this, unless we come up with a really smart idea to do something different, which hasn't yet happened in the history of man, is tailings dams. They're going to grow, they're going to be massive.
Mine waste is going to grow no matter what we do to solve it. we are going to face more mine waste. Because even in situ mining, which is what we've talked about a lot, creates mine waste. It's a different format, but it's still mine waste. The interesting thing is, I think on the whole, mine waste might actually come down. The footprint of coal mining, with its average of 9x stripping ratio, is actually substantially larger than the footprint of copper mining in interesting ways. So it could be that actually, as we do the energy transition, mine waste comes down, but who carries that mine waste is going to shift from coal fields to the copper regions. It's a fundamental shift of whose liability is carrying what.
Yeah, and someone's got to pay the price. Someone's got to deal with these. So optimizing around your tailings arrangement is a really smart idea.
Yep, agreed. So I'm pro optimization. I'm pro fixing this without shame. So let's start with the past. Fixing the past is very tricky. Okay. We can spend the rest of this podcast talking about reprocessing and talking about how you use the value left embedded in the tails to pay to properly dispose of the past dams. Most instances of that have not worked for a variety of economic reasons. And we could spend 10 podcasts on why.
And in fairness, if people want to discuss that, that is a topic when we do teach in our second job. It definitely comes up in just about every cohort, a discussion on reprocessing tailings, doing something different with tailings. And it's fascinating. Some of the ideas out there, some of the concepts, but it's not really addressing the fundamental problem, is it?
No. So the fundamental problem is that we have to first attach value to tailings. Your license to dispose of tailings has a value. It has a substantial value. And that value can be very quickly quantified into a value per dry metric ton of license you have. So if you get the license to dispose of 500 meters by 500 meters by 300 meters tall, if you have a tailings dam license of a certain size, you can look at how much revenue you can generate for that license. And then the question is, how do you maximize the revenue per dry metric ton of tailings? And there's lots of ways to do this. Like, this is where it gets really interesting, because you start butting up against other natural capital systems. So to optimize tailings, you have to look at the value of the ore, the value of the waste, the value of the copper in production, i.e. what's the copper worth to society once it's in use. And then you have to look at the value of the water and the cost of water. And then you have to look at fundamentally, how are you going to run the operation all the way back to the ore body? So to optimize tailings, to really truly optimize them, you can't say, oh, we're going to make this mine dry stack tomorrow. The reality is most mines are already about 35% dry stack. Most mines already operate a hydrocyclone to get out the easy bits. Okay? Now, we can have a long conversation about how some of those hydrocyclone materials probably had copper in them and probably should have been reground or floated versus sold off at $1 a cubic meter value to make it to increase the size of the fundamental dam. Okay, the coarse fraction, I don't think is actually properly being valued when we set it up. But we need to sit down and actually have a rational conversation about where we stand, how we stand, and what's the value and use of all the different parts of natural capital in the mine. Because I don't believe we're going to go 100% dry. I don't believe we're going to get rid of the wet tailings dam in the next 10 or 20 years. I do believe we can probably reduce the amount of material going to the most risky forms of tailings management by about 80%. But if we don't do the active step-by-step process of de-escalating the risk going forward, we are going to completely, like we did in Brazil, lose our license to have any wet material.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just talking about a lot of the physical aspects of the dam. There's also the chemical side. If you've got a sulfide ore body, there's possibly other sulfides that you're not trying to recover at all and you're sending to the dam. They dissolve, you get acid going into the natural systems. There's all kinds of other effects. There's other heavy metals, that acid may then dissolve, and there's a big knock-on effect. I know some parts of the world look at this and make their miners pull out all the sulfides, but other parts of the world, don't attack this. So I think there's a lot that can be done, but you're right. I think there is a lot of shame around tailings. We sort of don't want to talk about it. It's the Bruno, in some ways, of the mining industry.
Actually,
It's
Bruno,
a hard problem. It's a really hard problem.
considering how decayed Bruno's part of the house was, that's probably not a bad analogy. I think you're going
Sorry,
there.
I'm reaching around because Bruno's joining us on the podcast today.
Bruno always joins us.
Thank you, Disney. Please don't sue us.
Yes. So coming this week, I think Disney has enough stress.
Yes.
Yes. I don't think Disney is living down the last 3 months of its life.
No.
I mean, it's not. I mean, being a media company under a totalitarian dictator jerk who's trying to weaponize the U.S. in every major form. By the way, please sue me. Life goes on. I don't care at this point. Is not fun. I can't imagine being the CEO of Disney is a particularly fun role.
It would be definitely a tightrope at the moment. But Benjamin's going to leave further comments till he puts on his green frog suit. Anyway, back to tailings.
Excuse me. Though I must say the 3 new frogs, I think they might be friends of mine.
Why does that not surprise me?
Oh, life.
Oh,
And
poor Brandy.
here we are giving our poor editor stress. Because that's half the fun.
So back to dams. How do we approach them differently? Because when we do a study on a mine, yes, they're in there. People look at them. People think about where they can sit. But do we really spend a lot of time, or from your experience, have you seen people spending a lot of time optimizing them day one? Or is it just a necessary to have, let's get the permit and then let's go?
I think that dams are starting to be optimized more from day one,
Okay.
but dams are not being optimized rationally from day one. So the problem I'm having with all expansion and all new projects and pretty much everyone in the mining space is the first person to deal with tailings is the geologist. You have to have a mine plan that understands how you actually properly delineate ore and waste based on the total underlying value of that ore. So I'm going to argue that for something like iron ore, where the tailings are not sulfides and the tailings are not this and they're not that, you probably are going to want to increase the amount of tails you generate per ton of iron ore you ship. As we start to charge for carbon, as we start to spend a lot of money to remove impurities from smelters, and the cost is so high, because the total carbon footprint of a ton of iron ore is about 16 kilograms per ton of steel equivalent, because there's about 1.6 tons. It's about 10 kilograms of carbon per ton of iron ore onto the ship for Vale in Brazil. Okay? 10, plus or minus. Ton of copper, you've got about 3.5 tons of carbon, or 4 tons, or 5 tons, depending on where you are in the world, and that's going up per ton of copper produced. So you're suddenly making a very different set of assumptions around optimizing tailings for iron ore than you are for copper. They fundamentally require a different optimization approach based off of the core underlying geology. You have to start with the geology. Then you have to get the next group of people in the room who aren't ever in the tailings room, and that is the person who manages your crusher and whatever grinding circuits you have to agree on how you're going to manage size from a tailings risk perspective. I would argue that your single cheapest way to manage your tailings dam risk is get someone from Derek in the room with 3 hydrocyclone vendors and actually make sure that you're fundamentally managing your mill correctly to maximize the value of the tails.
I'm going to stop you there because I think you've left out a valuable step. I think that second person is dealing and talking with the metallurgist dealing with the downstream separation circuit to make sure you're maximizing that liberation. Then you go back to the crushing and grinding people because you don't want the tail, you want, in this case, the tail wagging the dog because you're only grinding to liberate. So you've really got to focus in on that. Where do we need to be to maximize that recovery first? Then they get brought into the conversation. Then that conversation happens with the tailings people. Yes, I do agree, but don't lose focus on what we're there to do.
Yeah, and then we still haven't even really gotten started on looking at the sulfides that are in the dam, if you're in a copper situation, for example, and figuring out what is the carbon value of those sulfides. Shipping a lower grade concentrate that consumes far less Scope 3 emissions in the smelter, and by the way, doesn't leave sulfides behind for 1,000 years to leach,
Yeah.
it's just not a bad idea. So you start to put these things together, and then you go back, once you've done all of these steps, you go back and figure out what is the percentage of tails that are going to be coarse, what are the percent that are going to be fine, what are the percent that are going to be ultra fine, i.e., can we get rid of the bugs dust, as you call it, or the slimes? Can we get rid of the really, really tiny stuff where we've lost all value?
Mm.
Because your flotation bubbles don't like ultrafines, tailings
No.
dams don't like ultrafines, and water loves ultrafines. So
Yes.
what can we do to remove that fraction? Then we put all of that stuff together and we come back and we say, how do we want to design the tailing storage facilities? I'm going to put an S on the end there to shift the risk profile. How much more can we put behind rock dams? How much more can we put behind coarse? And how much more can we put behind fines? But only on a per unit of metal basis produced. That's what we're dealing with.
We hope that's a dog or a cat, not a child.
That is a cat who's busy. Mommy, please don't encourage Athena because we're shooting podcast.
Don't worry, I do that to my children.
Okay, I get it. I'm on a podcast. Okay, sorry.
Once again, always fun with us. Never work with animals or children, and we have both. I don't have animals other than fish because they're nice and quiet, but I have very loud children to make up for that. This is real life. This is how we do what we do. Anyway, sorry, you're coming back to it. I was actually getting quite inspired there with your model for looking at it, and I'd be curious to hear anyone who's out there in the study world, especially at EPCMs. Do you look at it that way? Was that big a revelation from what you currently do at the moment?
Oh, I'm not done yet.
Oh, I know you're not done yet, but I'm butting in because your cat interrupted. Anyway, keep going. I'm fascinated by this manifesto. I've never seen someone chain it all together like this. You are one heck of a systems engineer, Benjamin.
I know, for a person who can't rise, that's not true. I wrote my first standard operating procedure this week.
Excellent.
I'm actually going through every one.
AI helped you.
No, actually, AI did not help me. I actually wrote it completely. I used AI to double check it, but I actually wrote it from scratch. And then,
anyway, I don't think AI is going to optimize your tailings dam next week. So keep going with your manifesto.
Or it could. Then you have to bring it back to a unit. You have to bring all cost centers and value centers back to either in tailings per dry metric ton of ore and per dry metric ton of final product. And you have to balance those two things together. And in products where product spec is the driver, like iron ore, you're going to focus far more per dry metric ton of product because you're less concerned about things. And for products where the actual cost, the footprint of the product is far less relevant, like copper, you're going to probably focus far more on per dry metric ton of ore. But the goal is to figure out, how do you get this back to a unit cost so you understand how to maximize the value?
I'm going to be controversial here.
Yeah.
I'm going to pose you a question. Given a tailings dam takes up space and there's solid and liquid, why would we do dry metric ton? Why wouldn't we? Because realistically, you could measure a tailings dam in tons, but it's going to be hard to capture the absolute tons of water. But you definitely can measure a tailings dam in volume because that's a capacity.
So the reason why I don't like volume or wet metric tons is you get the Enron problem. You incentivize people to cheat.
Sorry, I thought you were suggesting that it'll go away, which would be wonderful for everybody. No. People who think they're smart game the system, and
people die. People die.
Yeah.
The rational metric is wet metric tons, built behind converted dry metric tons and this and that. The problem is you have to put metrics out there that fundamentally don't reward people for playing games.
Okay.
And when you're dealing with a system where people are going to die, if you make a mistake, a dam fails, someone's going to die, a river's going to be killed, environment's going to be destroyed. Yep. You have to create underlying rules. While the metric is not perfect, the metric at least fundamentally results on those perspectives. Yeah, so you understand why game playing, Ben. Do you want to explain why game playing is a problem with wet metric tons? How do you, if you're a judge on cost per wet metric ton, what's your number one way to save money on a tailings dam?
You're going to maximize that.
Yep.
metric tons. And the easiest way of doing that is adding water.
Yep.
And we don't want more water in a tailings dam because that doesn't do well for stability. The water's what causes the problem 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah. So the moment you make the wet metric tons, you turn off the thickener. You're not worried about managing your underflow density. And the reality is
we fiddle it straight to the tailings dam. Yep, I get you.
Yep. And the thing we're pricing here is risk. We have to get our risk adjusted costs as low as possible. We're selling insurance to ourselves. Any metric that fundamentally incentivizes people to fundamentally take more risk is fundamentally a flawed metric for natural capital optimization.
Okay, so I'm buying into this. I'm buying into this master plan, but I've got one major problem with it at the moment. And that is you're crossing 4 or 5 different silos here. You are talking geologists, you are talking different areas of the processing plant, you're talking geotechs, you're talking insurance, which is going to be usually in the domain of the financial people.
Concentrate traders?
How do we get all these groups talking to each other to actually come together and solve this problem? Because I think that is part of the problem at the moment. The tailings dam, you look at it, and I know we've talked about this in class before. You look at the cost centers for a tailings dam, it's usually spread out across different cost centers in the mine rather than one big, ugly, this is your tailings cost. How do we do that?
So there's a reason why this is the last form of natural capital.
Okay.
I think what you do is you start by focusing on the forms of natural capital which naturally help solve this. It's easier to focus first on the value and cost of water, on the value and cost of the ore body. If you fix water and the ore body, then the tailings dam becomes a much easier thing to fix. So this is the big prize. This is the unbelievable, we're going to solve everything. When you tie all the natural capital subsystems together into a rational mine plan, this is the thing that major mining companies have to solve. Because if you look at a company like Vale, I would argue Vale based on its monopoly. And I'm going to go away from the word oligopoly or whatever you want to call the iron ore situation, but they've got a monopoly on high grade, carbon friendly iron ore. Okay. They literally have it. Okay. We are going to be seeing a massive shift away from BHP and Rio Tinto to Vale in the next 20 or 30 years as we go to greener steel. Okay. Because you lose 400 kilograms, 400 kilograms of carbon per ton of steel overnight by making one shift. That's your lowest hanging fruit there. And it's on billions of tons. So Vale is going to get a lot bigger. Vale should have a $150 to $200 billion market cap. Vale's market cap is tiny because of tailings dam failures. So this cost center, this thing that needs to be fixed, is billions of dollars to the industry in risk and liability. But the key to fixing it is not to say, we're going to fix tailings as a standalone system. The key to fixing it is actually to sit down and say, we are going to fix mining as a natural capital optimization problem. We are going to make the major miners billions of dollars. And by the way, along the way, we're going to reduce your risk.
And just to segue into that, you see that's what's kind of happening in Brazil at the moment with the shift to dry stack everywhere as opposed to other solutions to this problem? It's a knee jerk. Is that?
No, the shift to dry stack is Vale maintaining their license to operate at a cost. You want to fix these sorts of problems while you still have the profit control. Once you're told to fix something, it's a lot harder than when you give options.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair.
So one of the things that I like to do when I'm fixing something is I like to give the other side, here's 3 or 4 different ways to fix it. Not all of them are optimal. Which one is acceptable? And if all 4 ways are better than the current status quo, great, let's take a win. Okay. Yeah. The only thing I get out of workshopping this is that someone puts in a thickener control system and the underflow density is solid at 62%. I have just, over my life, mathematically guaranteed to save a few lives between all the different failures around the world. And on top of that, I've saved a few $1 billion for mining companies, which, by the way, means there's more taxes paid. People are richer. Salaries can be higher. Dividends can be higher. The world is richer. The thing about being an economist, or whatever the heck I am these days, I don't know what I am. I've written too many degrees in too many fields. The thing about doing the work that I'm doing is it's not about necessarily making any one subsystem richer. It's about realizing that if we actually use these things together, everyone gets richer. And tailings dams are a great example of that.
And optimize for the ultimate outcome across the silos. Yeah.
But you don't start with tailings. If you start with tailings as the thing to solve, you're not solving anything about the future.
You're still going to be playing with tailings, and you're going to be doing partial solves rather than attacking the bigger problem. Yeah.
I can go.
You're band-aiding. You're band-aiding, basically.
Let's start with 3 things we can solve. We can solve the underflow. We can solve the milling issue and get rid of the microfines. Micros, tiny stuff, high love water, all that horrible things it does.
Ultras.
Whatever it's called.
Sorry.
Anything that
You've come so far. You've come so far.
Is water not waterphobic? What's the water? What's the
hydrophobic?
Hydrophobic.
Yes.
Anything that's hydrophobic, anything that loves water. Does hydrophobic hate water?
Hydrophobic hates water. Hydrophilic loves water.
We have to remove the hydrophilic material from the flotation circuit. We have to remove the ultrafines. That's your first thing to solve.
Yeah.
Your second thing to solve what?
We won't even go there. In fairness, Benjamin is now a mining engineer, not a mineral processor, so we'll give him a whole pass on that one.
I'm not even going to try to get. It's Friday. I'm tired. We're not going to get the words right. But my point is,
yellow truck.
Thank you. I'm going to go look for a dump truck to drive around. I think I got a Tonka truck in the backyard we can play with.
Yes. Sorry. All jokes aside, no, I love this. It's a holistic approach. It's looking at the bigger picture and fixing the things downstream that are probably a lot easier to fix individually and make the system better. And then your net output is better for everybody.
Excellent.
Cool. And once again, in the meantime, if you have more questions, please send them to us on LinkedIn. We'll attempt to address them. And if you have suggestions of people who'd like to come and join us, because we will have our first guest soon, we would love to hear those too. In the meantime, behave yourselves and stay safe. Bye.